Bob Scully's World Show is brought to you by Fiera Capital. The power of thinking, optimal performance, intelligent innovation.
Hi, this is Bob Scully, and welcome to another edition of the World Show, Free Markets, the Fiera Series. The Atlas Network bears a hefty name and does a hefty job. It supports and facilitates the work of over 400 think tanks around the world, and thanks to Atlas, its help, and those think tanks, revolutions in thought, in social structure, in politics have occurred in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe, in North America. And we don't relate it back to Atlas, but actually that's where a lot of those ideas were born. And the head of that worldwide network is with us this week. His name is Brad Lipps. He's the CEO. Here he is. Brad Lipps, our topic today is a very attractive one, freedom, encompassing free markets, but beyond that, because that's what you do. You work to that goal. And as I was reading some of your speeches, one sentence popped up, would make a great headline. We have to bring down the other Berlin Walls of the world. This was when it was the 25th anniversary, I think, of the Berlin Wall falling. Right. And it's true, but what did you mean?
Well, I think that it's really important for friends of freedom, people who believe in individual liberty, to think big about the challenges that still remain in our respective societies. Berlin Walls, metaphorical Berlin Walls, still exist here in the U.S., across Europe, across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we think that the victory that the Berlin Wall symbolized, the fall of the Berlin Wall symbolized, with people up on top with their hands in the air, we need to remember that that's possible. And we need to remember that all sorts of government impediments to individual liberty and free markets need to be questioned, and that if we work towards their removal, we can actually unleash new tides of human freedom, and that should be something that we aspire to.
And what's interesting in that speech, you give many examples, but of course it's different. They are Berlin Walls, but they're different. I remember the Berlin Wall when I was in school in Germany with broken pop bottles, glass, glued on top so people would slice their. So that's obviously odious, and you want to really bring that down. And it's kind of simple in a way when it does come down. It's tough when it's up. But you go into things like regulation that fetter an economy so much and people's individual freedom that they add up to being a wall. They're the bricks in the wall, but you don't realize it.
Right. I think one of the big challenges to us is to think about the different ways that you can actually trigger economic growth, and with that, of course, higher living standards and more civil societies. And in lots of the world, there's a very positive story. As more of the world's been touched by global capitalism, you have more people moving out of poverty. One of the great stories of our era that people just don't celebrate enough is 1 billion people in China, India, other parts of the developing world having moved out of really dire poverty and towards middle-class existence. But the regulations that still exist, the legal impediments to working for yourself in a way that allows you to accumulate wealth and not just subsist, are rampant and obvious everywhere. So a lot of the work that my organization tries to support is towards tearing down things that may seem not on the scale of the Berlin Wall, little regulations that are that are inhibiting commerce, but they need to come down. They need focused attention if we're going to really help people, especially people from vulnerable populations all over the world, realize their potential.
And I thought, having traveled to France many a time, I thought I'd seen it all until I read that bit where you total up 400,000 regulations in the French economy. I mean, I thought, good Lord, how can they live with that? But they do.
Yeah, and we see it here in the U.S. as well. There's a wonderful group called the Competitive Enterprise Institute that publishes something called 10,000 Commandments that talks about all the different pieces of red tape that hold back private enterprise, and that's sadly become, I think, more the norm than the exception through most of the world, and something that needs some focus.
And you'd think that they'd collapse under their own weight which a brick wall won't do, but all these regulations probably become so intertwined and so on. But it really needs a good kick. If people like yourself and the organizations that you help don't do it, it won't happen.
Exactly. And what we found is that in many societies, you have entrenched interests that are the benefit from the rules and regulations that inhibit competitors from entering the marketplace. So you have sort of this conspiracy of entrenched interests that benefit from the rules, and they might be small in number, but the benefits they accrue are large. When you remove those regulations, everyone benefits a little bit, but it's not sort of a game changer. So what you really need are people that are vigilant because they believe in the principles of individual liberty and economic freedom and understand how much society has to gain, because you don't see individual actors empowered to take on regulations that they stand to benefit only a little bit. So it really depends on creating more public interest in the big project of creating a freer society with a level playing field that allows economies to operate at a sort of maximum level of efficiency.
And there's two schools on what I could call the contagion factor of freedoms, that one of them will lead to the next one. Some people say, yes, it's bound to happen. Some people are skeptical. For instance, there's that famous conversation that's reported to have taken place between Gorbachev and Deng Xiaoping, where Deng Xiaoping berated him and told him, you're a fool. You're opening up with glasnost,
Yes.
your media, and perestroika, your economy. You should do only the economy and keep the lid on everything else. The Chinese are still in that groove. They want a totally authoritarian system with capitalism. Is that possible?
Well, it's proven to be possible till now. I don't know if it's possible long term, because I think that there's a lot of dynamism in the economy in China and in society in China that will be tough to keep a lid on for any real length of time. So I'm part of that school of thought, or a believer of that school of thought, that if you can unleash economic activity that empowers individuals, establish property rights, and align those incentives correctly, you're going to have societies that inevitably demand press freedoms and political freedoms. Lots of our partners that work in difficult territories often focus on the economic freedoms, knowing that this is step one. And I thoroughly believe that bigger freedoms await, but that the economic freedoms are really important to get.
And so it starts with the economy, and then I suppose it goes to free press, and then it will end, and then maybe rule of law, and then free elections. It's a long road.
Right. There's many different layers, but that I think gives us more opportunities to work on different battlefronts. Where, in some Islamic countries, just freedom of association and a sense of spreading tolerance, that maybe comes first, even before the economic freedoms that are achievable.
And Atlas, one of the very interesting things, we'll get into that in a little bit, how it started, but just to explain for the audience, Atlas helps think tanks around the world. There are hundreds of them. Even in impoverished parts of the world, people are finding the time and the effort and the energy to do that, not just in the rich, developed economies. Every year you give out awards, and you also give out grants. You try to help them. I was struck by the fact that sometimes people will risk their lives we know you'll risk your life to escape jail or something like that, or torture, but they will risk their lives even beyond that simply for the right to publish a book.
Right.
You do encounter that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is very fun about bringing the organizations that we partner with around the world together is that you have this incredible sense of inspiration where people feed off of each other's stories, and you realize that all of these battles to tear down the Berlin Walls in our different societies, all of them are important, but then it's very humbling to come face to face with friends from Venezuela who have had their businesses stolen and who have been under physical attack because of the stands that they've taken against the very totalitarian government there. And friends of ours from China that have been in prison and in Afghanistan with very heart-wrenching stories that remind us that the founding fathers of the U.S. pledged their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, and many around the world do the same thing with hopes for a greater future for their societies.
And one guest in this series that I can quote, but he did it on the record. In other cases, these are things that I've heard from some of your colleagues, but for their own safety, they'd rather not get into it. But Tom Palmer told us on this set about going to Eastern Europe and the Middle East and having to hide samizdat and you know, what was considered seditious literature. Right. And if he had been caught, he might be in jail today. So he did risk his freedom. Do you occasionally, in missions like that, where there is risk to your people, do you sometimes hold them back, or do they come to you for guidance on it before they try something like that?
We defer to the judgment of our partners about what is safe and prudent. Some want to take more risks than others. We think there's a lot of fruitful things you can do without exciting authorities, because what we try to always emphasize is that our partners are working as a patriot would, trying to look for a better future for their society, often by talking about what has worked elsewhere in terms of encouraging entrepreneurship and encouraging the kind of commerce that uplifts societies. So we think there's a lot of common ground to talk about things that no one should argue are beneficial for the future of societies. But of course, in some difficult places, about 25% of our partners reside in countries that are labeled as unfree or mostly unfree in the Fraser Institute's indices. They have to make some interesting calculations about where they can work safely.
Would you ever forbid someone from going somewhere saying, this is really, you're asking for it?
There's countries where we have not figured out how to work constructively. But I'll give you an example. So in North Korea, it would be impossible to have an Atlas-affiliated partner. However, we work in South Korea with organizations that do spread information into North Korea with USB drives and other means of getting information in there, and who have been working with North Korean refugees to, because those are the most powerful voices in explaining the information block that most have lived under in North Korea, and who can really become powerful spokespersons for the free society.
I think you've picked the country, I'm sure it occurred to a lot of people, really the most impossible challenge is like climbing a rock face. It's unless you call it the Kim Jong-un Institute, they will never even dream of allowing it.
Right, and the thing that I guess is interesting, and I think maybe brings us back to the Berlin Wall metaphor, is that our friends in that part of the world firmly believe that that regime is not permanent, and there will be a crisis and an opportunity at some point when it falls. And the great challenge to us is to prepare for those moments so that we're ready in advance, so that the ideas of liberty and people who can figure out the way to make transitions to policies that would set North Korea onto a positive course, that those will be ready when the opportunity presents itself.
And I notice Atlas and most of those think tanks are rigorously nonpartisan. They don't get caught up in the web of political controversy in countries. That's tough to do when you're in the social discourse and you know, interest groups and so on. How do you maintain that discipline?
Well, all of our think tank partners are independent, so they all make their own judgments. For Atlas, because we do work worldwide, and our role is really that of a service organization to this network of think tanks all around the world. We're able to stay above the fray because we don't get involved in partisan politics. Some of our think tanks do wind up criticizing the current regime and, I guess, in effect, helping political challengers, but they don't do that as a partisan effort. They are looking for audiences with all parties that would be sympathetic or that would give a fair hearing to their prescriptions. One interesting example from about a year ago, there was an organization called Libertad y Progreso, Liberty and Progress, in Argentina, that put together a series of, they called it a crash course about populism, that they distributed by video, got millions of views, and then presidential candidate, Macri, who was running against the populist regime that had sort of been in power for more than a decade. He started to point out those videos and TV interviews. He was saying, you need to be showing your audiences this critique. This is the danger that we need to defeat. So when he won, it was sort of a nice validation of the populist rejection that Libertà Progresso had been trying to foment.
And the Montreal Economic Institute, if we can toot our own horn, has influenced healthcare policies and so on in Canada.
Indeed.
But always, in all these cases, though, they don't sign up for, they're not card carrying. That's really not, that doesn't seem to be the tendency.
Exactly. I mean, I think that if you want to have long-term credibility, you can't be tied to a political candidate or a political party. Those things, the fortunes of individual politicians rise and fall outside of your control, and the challenge for the kinds of organizations that we think can have a real constructive role in the future of freedom, they need to be committed to principle first and not politicians.
And one thing I also found quite interesting is how this got started. Antony Fisher had started some kind of think tank before that in England after the war, your founder. But then he decided, and I think it's a pretty smart idea, that he could do more good as what you call a service organization, helping all think tanks talk to each other, and then rewarding them and trying to help them perhaps with resources when he could. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting story. Fisher had been a Royal Air Force pilot. He fought World War II. After World War II, was worried about the future of Britain and first wanted to go into politics. Became persuaded that he needed to change the climate of opinion before any politician could have an impact. So his group, the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs in London, was dismissed as sort of antiquated and irrelevant for a couple of decades before Thatcher came to power and said, you laid the foundation for what I'm now achieving. So Fisher, at that point, saw this opportunity to replicate the experiment wherever it would take hold, help people with an entrepreneurial mindset, but a commitment to wanting to change ideas, and help them get off the ground, because it's difficult to start these civil society organizations.
Absolutely.
And Milton Friedman explained it, saying, well, instead of doing this on a retail basis, when Antony Fisher created Atlas Network, it was to do it on a wholesale basis and to see how we could distribute this through a network of organizations that all benefit from talking to one another and learning from one another.
And I'm always impressed when I see, when you have these, occasionally there's a prize given out and there's a dinner, and the finalists, we have a little video on each of the finalists. It's from all over, first of all. It could be from Denmark or South Africa or Cambodia or wherever. Yeah. They seem to be everywhere. And it's always very moving and very impressive. It's probably hard for the jury to give a prize in a case like that.
It is really difficult. We feel very fortunate. We let judges come up with the final decision, but year after year, we feel like all the finalists that make it to this final level of our award processes are all very deserving, and so it's sort of an embarrassment of riches in a way. So, yeah.
And Africa, 25 think tanks. I mean, just that. When you think of Africa, you think, boy, they're not there yet. They definitely are.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the really exciting stories in Africa right now has to do with extending property rights, where they have not been defined in the past. And maybe the most heart-wrenching example is in South Africa, where one of the legacies of apartheid has been that blacks who suffered under that regime have not been able to reclaim title to land that was nationalized a century ago. The law is actually in place to do that, but navigating the process has been extremely difficult until an organization called the Free Market Foundation started to work on exactly that process. And what they found out was that by investing, I think it's about $200 or so in sort of the legal fees and the processing, you're unlocking capital that's worth thousands of dollars, and you're providing this amazing service to help people that have really been stripped of their dignity in many ways achieve it. So their poster gal for this is someone who was 99 years old when she was receiving for the first time the property to the home she'd lived in almost all of her life.
Incredible.
Saying, now I finally can pass on this as a right to my children.
And in very developed societies, there's also courageous stuff being done that I've discovered just from the research for this series. The Acton Institute, for instance, it's a very different point of view from religion from the right or the left in conventional terms. It's religion and economic freedom shown to be compatible. How did that happen?
Yeah, well, the Acton Institute is a really interesting case in point. One of my colleagues at Atlas, Alex Chafoin, got involved with the founding of Acton, which was inspired by Robert Sirico, who has
Father
been at
Sirico
home
with
for...
he looks like Bing Crosby with his Roman collar.
He kind of does, he does. Father Sirico saw this opportunity, saying that too often the church was teaching liberation theology, which has this mix of socialist economics, and there needs to be a counter-argument made to show the compatibility, how important it is with the stewardship of private property, that the ideas of economic freedom are actually very compatible with Scripture, and that we shouldn't be apologizing for the institutions that uplift the poor and make societies healthier and wealthier.
And I notice also, I might be wrong, but it seems to me you've escaped the fate of some purely economic organizations that stand for capitalism and so on, and have conferences in Idaho every year or wherever, and the left hates them and demonstrates against them and so on. You've not been demonized. We don't read in the paper all-out attacks on you as being the realm of the powerful or anything like that.
No, maybe with this interview it'll all start as you reveal our work to the world. But I think we stay out of partisan politics, which takes us out of the immediate battles. I think also one of the things that we try to do is communicate that the Friends of Freedom have the moral high ground, and we should claim it without being bashful at all. And when you see our friends from developing parts of the world where it's very difficult to demonize us as advancing the interests of rich people, which tends to be the critique that comes from the left, when a lot of our focus is really on how do you uplift vulnerable populations, how do you get rid of corporate welfare, how do you help people that are coming out of prison, that are denied opportunities because of strange regulations. We're really a compassionate organization, a compassionate movement, and that's what we try to convey.
And I thought to myself, reading on all those things that you do, this is what UNESCO was supposed to do. But UNESCO got very political very quickly with camps, pro and con and so on, and then sniping and infighting, and has done good things, but not just. Have you ever been compared to the United Nations? It's a form of, you're close to that original idealistic concept.
Yeah, we have the ambition to connect people around the world that favor liberty and the general principles of a free society. We don't take any government funding, so we rely and are sort of beholden to our individual donors that give us money voluntarily. So we don't get trapped fighting over government grants and trying to bend our mission to do things that we shouldn't be doing, because we're very lucky to have stakeholders that care first and foremost about the principles of a free society and believe that we have a mission that can really help unlock a lot more energy to expand awareness of the importance of these principles, not just in the U.S., but all over the world, as you said.
And when you hold events like the Liberty Forum, I've noticed in the elevators, for instance, when going up and down in the hotel where it's taking place, a lot of kids, a lot of college kids, and I have the impression they came to you. You didn't have to go proselytize to get their participation.
Right. Well, one of the exciting things right now is that there is a student liberty movement that is growing, that you see in the streets of Brazil, where they just impeached a president, and some of the signs that were being held up by the kids there are, say, less Marx, more Mises, referring to a great Austrian economist.
Mises, Ludwig.
And so we see that all over, and it's really exciting, and that's one of the things that I think is energizing, to realize that there is a youth movement. This isn't about gray-haired economists. This is something that's really vibrant and you can be passionate about.
And you're right, and Brad Lips, long life to you and to Atlas.
Thanks so much, Bob.
Brad Lips, and now here's something else coming up on the World Show.
The quantitative easing program in the United States, at first a lot of people said, oh, there's going to be a big explosion of inflation. But the Fed actually, in a sense, sterilized it. That is, they are paying banks not to lend the money out. They're paying interest on reserves that they never paid before. So if you look at the whole package, quantitative easing plus paying the banks not to lend, it's really a financial allocation program. It's tinkering with financial markets, where the Fed has bought trillions in real estate bonds, mortgage-backed securities. They're trying to prop up housing prices, keep homeowners thinking that their houses are worth more than they fundamentally are, and thereby according to Ben Bernanke's theory, that keeps consumer spending and the economy going, but hasn't really had that effect. But the Fed now has this insanely expanded portfolio. Banks are sitting on trillions in excess reserves, and it's made the conduct of monetary policy in the traditional way impossible. So the Fed is just making it up as they go along now. They're not quite sure what to do. Well, if you go to the data, if you just plot what was happening to total output in the economy, it was in an unsustainable bubble before the bubble collapsed. Gross domestic product was above trend, and it didn't come just back to trend. It went crashing through and went well below trend. And since then, we haven't caught up to the old trend, the bubble path, but we've been paralleling it quite a bit below it. But I think having destroyed a lot of capital by investing in houses that people didn't need, that's the best we're going to be able to do. As long as we keep growing, the U.S. economy is growing at somewhat less than 2%, which used to be considered anemic, but that may be the best we can hope for until we get policies on the real side of the economy that stop discouraging investment so drastically. We've got a lot of uncertainty about health care costs, about taxes, about future regulations.
Brad Lipps was our guest this week on Free Markets, the Fiera series of the World Show. I'm Bob Scully. Have a great week. Thanks.
Bob Scully's World Show was brought to you by Fiera Capital. The power of thinking, optimal performance, intelligent innovation.